So this topic is one I've been interested in since I did my master's in human ecology at Edinburgh University back in 1995, 96 it was. Partly because I was thinking for myself, you know, as I'd done my undergraduate stuff, I'd spent a year abroad. I'd spent a year in Ghana, actually teaching English in a village in Ghana. And then and I was thinking, well, what am I going to do with my life? And how do I earn a living doing stuff I care about? And the more I kind of thought about that, and as I was doing this human ecology degree, the more it made me think about how the whole world of work and economics is structured. And that's what led me to do my thesis, my research initially in this area, and end up, you know, what was published then, some kind of paper on it, and then later became an updated version with the Why Workbook. So it's something I feel is like a cornerstone of our society and the way things are designed, and that if we can crack this piece, we crack all sorts of related pieces. So this is what I'm quite passionate about. Even though it's not like my main area of work, you know, it's not that I spend my life talking about money, economics, and work and things, but for some reason it's important to me. So let's see. Yeah, so this kind of quote in a way summarizes for me where we're trying to get to. You know, Aristotle said, where your talents meet the needs of the world, therein lies your vocation. So that connection between the need of the world and your particular qualities, talent, passion, purpose, the connection between those two, I think if we get that right, then people are living their highest potential and they're doing something that's useful for the world. That's essentially the piece that we're after. And so the first bit that I'm going to talk about is more about the person and, you know, what is it that lights us up and keeps us alive, it makes us engaged in the world, and then more on to, okay, what are some of the, you know, if we look at the economics, both national, international, and local, what could we actually do about it to make sure that this can be achieved, essentially. So this is a summary, I think, of the core thesis. In a way, as I said, this one is less of a kind of reflective musing and more of a, this is what I think, basically. And this is the kind of summary. Current structures of economics and work are damaging people, psychospiritually, dividing our communities, and destroying the rest of life on Earth. A bit of a blunt statement, but I think in essence it's true. And we can turn this around, one, by implementing a set of policies at national and international level, and two, actually taking action in our communities to build parallel economies that make the old one redundant. So that's basically what we're going to unpack over the next half an hour or so. Okay, I am going to need to try to move these videos, which are showing your videos, much as I like to see you, are showing up on the side here. And then it means I can't read the text when it comes up. Okay, there we go. Okay, so if you think about it, in this time that we're in, this time of non-linear transition where things are falling apart, and at the same time, we're trying to work out what the next phase is. So there's massive innovation and things going on as the current systems fall apart. We really need people to be at their most alive, right? To be not just following rules and following the paths that have been carved out before, but really to be on the edge, to be fully engaged with the world, to be bringing their creativity, their critical thinking, and engaging in this collective R&D process, really, that humanity needs to go through now to find out what is the next version of our civilization of human life on Earth. Because the one which we've had clearly isn't working. Did work for a while, but then had the seeds of the problems sown in it, and we're now reaping the harvest of those problems. So we now need to really look at what's next. And the problem is that, and I'll go through this Schumacher quote, that most people aren't alive, critically engaged, and at their creative best. Close observation discloses that most of us, most of the time, behave and act mechanically like a machine, driven from the past, basically, past patterns. The specifically human power of self-awareness is asleep, and the human being, like an animal, acts more or less intelligently, solely in response to outside influences. Only when you make use of your power of self-awareness do you attain to the level of a person, to the level of freedom. At that moment, you're living, not being lived. Fritz Schumacher, who wrote a couple of beautiful books, there's a Small is Beautiful is the one that really kind of woke me up many years ago. But this idea of living and not being lived, right? Waking up from the consensus trance, I guess, as they used to say back in the 60s, 70s, and really engaging in the world, asking critical questions, thinking, okay, what can we do? How can we create solutions that are going to take us forward? That's what we need right now. And yet, the way our society is structured and the economy is structured is really set us all up to be passive consumers, to be able to consume as much as we can so that we generate the money that keeps the economy growing and can pay us to do jobs that we aren't necessarily particularly enthusiastic or engaged in. So it's no wonder that we're not responding fast enough to the challenges around us. You know, we're like any species. It's evolve or die, essentially. And any species survives based on its ability to respond to the feedback from the environment around it. And yet we're embedded in this system that we've created for ourselves that has turned a large amount of humanity into passive consumers, which is exactly what we don't need at the moment, apart from the ecological impact and things. And I was very inspired in this work by the work of Ivan Illich. If you've read the Why Work book, you'll see a lot of quotes. And this is such a powerful quote that I wanted to use it, share it in full. And he's talking at the moment about development in terms of development exported by the West to, inverted commas, developing countries. But the core of what we're exporting is really the core of the system that we've developed here. So it applies just as much to us as it does to, as it does to the system that we, there we go, the system that we export to others. So development based on high per capita energy quanta and intense professional care is the most pernicious of the West's missionary efforts. A project guided by an ecologically unfeasible conception of human control over nature, right? Unfeasible, just impossible to achieve. And by an anthropologically vicious attempt to replace the nests and snake pits of culture by sterile wards for professional service. What he means by that, he means nests and snake pits of culture as a positive thing. So the kind of wildness, the unknown, the rawness of our culture by everything being organized and structured. And so numbing us to the energy of life, essentially. The hospitals that spew out the newborn and reabsorb the dying. The schools run to busy the unemployed before, between, and after jobs. So why couldn't we be having lifelong learning? Why have this kind of school and then you're meant to work and then occasionally you do a bit of training? But the action learning, that's the nature of life, right? Learning isn't just something you isolate somewhere. It's embodied and interwoven with our attempts to do stuff in the world. So as he says, school, set up for the unemployed, whereas really we should be connecting the two. The apartment towers where people are stored between trips to the supermarket. The highways connecting garages from a pattern tattooed into the landscape during the short development spree. These institutions, designed for lifelong bottle babies, wheeled from medical center to school to office to stadium, begin now to look as anomalous as cathedrals, albeit unredeemed by any aesthetic charm. That image stuck with me for ages, lifelong bottle babies. in terms of passive consumers, just being fed by the experts along the way. Almost like that, don't know if you've seen The Matrix, but the image that comes to my mind is that image of The Matrix, where you have all these kind of beings plugged into the system, somehow feeding their energy into the system. That's kind of the core of how it's structured. So one of the main reasons and kind of aspects of this is the way that we actually value things through our current economics. And as I'm sure you know, essentially they're valued by how much money they generate, how much profit they make, not by the value they add to life for the individual or life for other life beings on the planet. And so, as Audre Lorde says, a beautiful writer, the principal horror of any system which defines the good in terms of profit rather than in terms of human need is that it robs our work of its erotic value, its erotic power, and life appeal and fulfillment. So when Audre Lorde is using this word erotic, she's really meaning this, the creative value, the power. Eros is the power to create, the power to contribute. So rather than us being encouraged to try stuff out and bring our own creativity in, we're kind of put into this industrial production line, essentially, where we just add our bit to the puzzle, do what we're told to do, and generate more money for the economy. And as Capra says, we cannot be empowered by work that destroys the environment around us or creates systems of inequality. No matter how our work is organized, it cannot fully empower us unless we believe in its purpose. So it's no wonder that so many people are numbing themselves because they're engaged in work which somewhere they know is not of value to life on the planet. And you can't live with that and face that the whole time. You have, because there doesn't seem to be an alternative. So we just numb ourselves to it and kind of go along as these bottle babies, as Illich said, because we can't see a way out, essentially, and slowly it wears away our human capacity to be alive, essentially, deadening systems. So, building on this point, Illich links it to the fact that we're not even, encouraged to do the things that would meet our basic needs. Everything's kind of outsourced to the economy or outsourced to the expert. And so when he talks about here, the concept implies the replacement of widespread, unquestioned competence at subsistence activities, right? Of being able to, grow the food or fix stuff or, do the things that create the kind of habitat for you to be able to live that we don't even know. So many kids don't even know where cheese comes from, don't even know it comes from a cow, right? Just let alone competence at being able to look after yourself. So the replacement of that ability by the use and consumption of commodities. So everything is fed to us. The monopoly of wage labor over all other kinds of work. And this becomes a critical point, that what is valued is work that is paid. Redefinition of needs in terms of goods and services mass produced according to expert design. So trust the experts, let them do whatever needs to be done and just consume it. I mean, the other day I was thinking, what other species actually poisons itself with the food it eats? None that I know of. But if you look at the percentage of food in the supermarket that's not actually good for us, but is bad for us, and yet we just consume it because, this is what's there, and the experts, they produced all this food for us, and because we've lost a sense of purpose, we kind of compensate for that by consuming all this junk food and things. So finally, the rearrangement of the environment in such a fashion that space, time, materials, and design favor production and consumption, while they degrade or paralyze use value oriented activities that satisfy needs directly. So whereas we might be able to meet most of our needs directly and locally, it's all outsourced to others to meet those needs for us. And what does that leave us to do? It leaves us to take the paid job so that we can earn the money to pay for the stuff that others are producing for us, so that we can feed the economy to pay us for our jobs. I mean, it's so interlinked that it's very hard to, like the fish in water, to be able to step outside of. Yeah, so essentially what we need is the world of work, and then therefore more broadly the way we structure our economy, to bring out the highest potential in people, to release their creativity, to enable them to connect to work that is meaningful and has sense to them. As Starhawk says, the task seems therefore to be how we can connect our psycho-spiritual needs with those of our everyday lives. How to build a bridge that brings into the world of the everyday a sense of the sacred. In this way, the everyday changes and deepens until the sacred, like an underground stream, wears away control from below. So connecting our psycho-spiritual needs with those of our everyday lives. You know, why when people go to work should they have to leave their soul in the car, you know, or in the train, or however they get to work? Why can't people bring their whole beings with their values, with their deeper meaning into the work environment? Because it doesn't align, and we're having to kind of, because we can see how the system we're running at the moment, somewhere we know it's reached its sell-by date, and it's creating more destruction than it is creativity. And therefore we can't bring this sense of joy, meaning, purpose, the sacred, as Starhawk calls it, into our work. If we were to find a way to do that, then we would find that we wrest back control from that system, start to take control over it ourselves, and therefore give it less energy, give the system less energy, which means it starts to fade and we start to build up something more meaningful. So as we move to look at, you know, how the economic system is designed, Richard Douthwaite talks about how we've become so dependent on it. So it's hard for people to see how they could do it differently. And we've kind of de-skilled ourselves or disconnected ourselves from the things that we actually need to be doing. Now, as he says, a large part of the world's population has lost the means and the ability to provide for itself. So the moment that we lose the means and ability to provide for ourselves, we obviously become dependent on others, and has become dependent on a single, highly unstable economic system, which we've seen, you know, a number of times over recent decades, that has no use for a growing proportion of it. Right, that also has no use because, you know, the unemployed, well, there's no use for these people in this system. For the next few years, unless there is a trade war, he says, this was back late 90s, I think, politicians are unlikely to be willing or able to protect their citizens from being damaged by this system, even though it's now actually running backwards and making life worse throughout the world. So it's so embedded in the political system, in our economic and social systems, that it's very hard to find a way out of it because we've built all these dependencies in. Yeah, and this is a subtle one that Illich points to here, where he says, you have the paid work, but ultimately the ability to sustain people doing paid work requires other people to do unpaid work. For example, to look after the kids, or to look after the household, or to kind of support the community. All things that has been called voluntary work. that is seen as good and really encouraged, but there's a insidious side to it, because it's by kind of, in a way, the economic system benefits from people just agreeing to do things voluntarily, so that the economic system can keep going. So increasingly, you're also seeing how they're encouraging people to do more, to care more for their family voluntarily, to look after their elderly, so that the state doesn't have to pay for it, right? So the state is having to pick up the costs, essentially, that the economic system is generating: social stress, ecological stress, because those costs aren't included in the price of a product. Right, so Illich here says, wherever wage labor expands, its shadow, and he calls it industrial serfdom, slavery, also grows. So wage labor is the dominant form of production, and housework as the ideal type of its unpaid complement, unpaid and therefore unvalued by the economic system, GDP, growth, progress, are both forms of activity without precedent in history or anthropology. They thrive only where the absolute, and later the industrial state, destroyed the social conditions for subsistence living. So made it impossible for people to be able to meet their own needs. Why? Because we need to make people dependent on the economic system so that they spend money and keep the economy growing. They spread, meaning the wage labor and housework, or industrial serfdom as he calls it, they spread as small scale as, at the same time as small scale, diversified vernacular communities have been made sociologically and legally impossible, into a world where individuals throughout their lives live only through dependence on education, health services, transportation, and other packages provided through the multiple mechanical feeders of industrial institutions. So it's become this abstracted system that is kind of really reflects the mechanistic mind worldview that came out of the Industrial Revolution, and just kind of tries to organize everything around these economic indicators, and has no sense of the interior dimensions of people, of what actually makes somebody thrive, and of course at the same time ignores the value of life ecologically on the planet. So that was the not so good news. So now we come on to, how do we then create an economic system that actually values useful activity and uplifts people in their essence? Right, so how do we create the alternative here? And the two core principles here: one, people should have the right to meaningful work. So anything that you do that contributes to the development of yourself, to your community, or the wider society. So we should be able to do stuff that's meaningful, essentially. Now that's shouldn't be such a big ask. And the right to sufficient income to cover basic needs. So everybody should be able to meet their basic needs, and we should be able to do stuff that we find is meaningful. So if we take those principles, what does that start to look like? So as I said, there are two main areas that we can act in. One is the policy domain, and the other is the community domain. And we're going to start in the policy domain and just look at three policies that can make a big impact in terms of getting us in that direction. First is the Ecotax Reform. The second, a basic citizens' income. And the third, how we share and distribute paid work. So obviously this is short, I'm just summarizing all of these. There's a lot more background on it in different sources, also in the Why workbook. But the essence of it, of Ecotax Reform, is that you basically stop taxing people's creativity. So if you think about it, a tax on the money that you earn is a tax on your creativity, right? So phase out taxes on income, profits, and value added, and start to tax unsustainable energy at source. So right at the beginning, so it ripples through the whole pipeline. tax unimproved site value of land. Now, this may not be familiar to you, but it's a critical one in terms of enabling people to access land to do things productively with. Because what happens is that speculators buy up land and they just sit on it, essentially, and don't allow anybody to do anything until its value increases. When, for example, houses might come to be built on it. So they might they might be looking at the future and thinking, this town is likely to expand in this direction over the next 20 years. I'll just buy this land here and do nothing with it and not allow anybody or the community to do anything with it and just wait until the town or the city starts to expand, and then people want to build there. And then, of course, they sell the land with a big dividend. So the way you can get around that would obviously be by taxing what they call the unimproved site value of land. And then the use of other common resources. So the things that are scarce, right? Labor and people's creativity is plentiful, and yet that's what we tax. And yet good quality water, clean air, healthy ecologies, those are becoming scarce. So those are the things that we should be taxing, not people's creativity. So that's the essence of what Ecotax reform. It's more about stimulating people to engage creatively and productively, but to do so in such a way that they limit the use of non-renewable resources and common resources. So the second policy aspect is this idea of people being able to meet their basic needs. And there's actually been this is one of the things that triggered me to release the Why Work books. There's been quite a lot of debate about this and experiments in different places, including in Utrecht, I believe, where Pim and Leida live, although it was a limited experiment. Anyway, they didn't have all the conditions in place, but you can see people now struggling with this, and within Corona time, it becomes even more relevant. So what is a basic citizen's income? It's basically a tax-free income paid by the state to every man, woman, and child as a right of citizenship. Everybody gets it. It is not the amount you get is not affected by other income, by wealth, work, gender, or marital status. Everybody gets it equally, same amount, except for a few exceptions here. It's age related. So there's a higher amount for adults than children, and a higher amount for the elderly than for those of working age, because they have more costs to cover. And it would replace all existing benefits and pensions, but would include a few additional supplements for people with disabilities and for housing for low-income families. So it takes away the whole bureaucracy around benefits, which saves the state a massive amount of money, and it takes away the degrading experience of having to go and ask for your benefits and prove that you're trying to look for a job, right, to do something useful. Whereas there's plenty of things, maybe you're spending your time doing lots of useful things in your community, with your family, helping friends, whatever it is. But the state and the system is telling you that you're of no use. So we have to give you a bit of money here, but only if you prove you're doing your best to try to get a job. So what it strips away the dehumanizing aspect around benefits and things, and saves massive cost in terms of bureaucracy. There is no potential corruption around, the distrust of how they're really looking for a job. Oh, I need to test it out. All of that disappears. Boom, basic tax-free income for everybody. Obviously, there would then be lots of debate about exactly what rate that income should be, etc. But these are the core principles. And then finally, this question of how we distribute shared work. And I wanted to share this quote from Bertrand Russell, because it was one of the things that got me thinking the most early on about this question. So he says, suppose at any given moment, a certain number of people are engaged in the manufacture of pins. They make as many pins as the world needs, working, say, 8 hours a day. Somebody makes an invention by which the same number of men, 1932, you might say people now, makes the same number of people can make twice as many pins as before. So an invention, twice as many pins as before. But the world doesn't need twice as many pins. Pins are already so cheap that hardly any more will be bought at a lower price. Now, in a sensible world, everyone concerned in the manufacture of pins would take to working, would take to working 4 hours instead of 8. And everything else would go on as before. So you'd be earning the same amount of money, you'd be producing the same amount of pins, meeting everybody needs. Hey, and you're only working 4 hours instead, which means you've got other time to do useful stuff. But in the actual world, this would be thought demoralizing. The men still work 8 hours, there are too many pins, some employers go bankrupt, and half the men previously concerned in making pins are thrown out of work. Half the men are idle, while half are still overworked. In this way, it's ensured that the unavoidable leisure shall cause misery all round, not leisure by choice, but leisure by being made unemployed, shall cause misery all round, instead of being a source of universal happiness. Can anything more insane be imagined? That's still the system we work with. That's still the underlying design. So obviously there's something fundamentally wrong with that. And the question becomes, how do we make sure that the paid work that is available becomes a choice about how much time we spend in paid work, how much time we spend in other work that maybe we could be valuing in other ways, which we'll come to. So this is just a bunch of ideas for how the things one could stimulate at government level to share the paid work around. So obviously job sharing, generally shorter working week or year. In fact, I can't remember which country it was, they're talking about reducing it to 4 days a week. Overtime restrictions so that you don't kind of keep working longer and longer. Well, why not then share it around? Longer holidays, potentially more part-time work. V-time is something where you can trade time for income in your negotiations. So you can say, okay, rather than earn this much, I'd earn less, and then take some more time. Flexi time, deciding when you start and finish. Sabbaticals, mid-career training, opportunities for earlier retirement. And don't forget, all this is a package when you look at Ecotax, basic income, and this, because obviously having that basic income in place enables this kind of flexibility as well. So those are kind of looking at the governmental level. And I just wanted to include this one as we move over to community, because Maynard Keynes, was the person people credit for the development of the free market economy as we had it. And actually, if you actually look back at a lot of what he said, we haven't gone in the direction that he was proposing at all. He says here, I sympathize with those who would minimize rather than those who would maximize economic entanglement between nations. Ideas and knowledge and art and hospitality and travel, these are the things which should of their nature be international. But let goods be homespun whenever it is reasonably and conveniently possible. And above all, let finance be primarily national. So he could see what was going to happen if you got globalization, essentially. Okay, so how do we help move ourselves more in that direction? Illich has this concept of what he calls the vernacular. So how we create a system that brings value to the vernacular, which are the useful activities. Here he describes them as the activities of a people when they're not motivated by thoughts of exchange. So not I have to get something back for what I do. A word that denotes autonomous, non-market related actions through which people satisfy everyday needs. Those acts of competence, lust, or concern that we want to defend from measurement and manipulation by the Chicago boys and by socialist commissars. So notice Illich is not taking a position to the right or the left. He's saying how both those major systems create the same problem, essentially. So the vernacular. So this is when I researched how might we create something like this. These were the different elements that I discovered that I think could make for a coherent community level economic system that could run in parallel with the other one, with the mainstream, but could gradually wrest back power from it and energy from it, where we could start to do a lot more at the local level, and only the things that are necessary we could do at the other level, where if you start to include the ecological costs of production and transport, it also becomes economically more sensible to do more things more locally. The problem obviously being at the moment that the social and ecological costs of production and transport are externalized in the cost of the product. That means they're not included. And who has to pick up the cost of those? The communities who are most vulnerable socially and ecologically, and the states when they choose to clean up the mess that the economic system has made, generating more profit for the companies who aren't actually paying the real cost of their activities. So just to go through some of these elements, obviously money is a key aspect, the means that enable people to exchange things, and there are different structures that you can be working with, like a community bank. And community meaning kind of owned by stakeholders in the community, so the decision making and accountability is felt locally. Credit unions that I know you also have, we also have over here in the Netherlands, and local exchange and trading systems, which were starting to blossom, when I was doing my master's research, so mid-90s, and are still around, but have never really taken off because there's not been the need, or people haven't kind of really stepped into trying to create this parallel system. But what a LET system is, local exchange trading system, is an alternative currency, basically a digital currency. You could do it on the blockchain, but before then we just did it on computers, and the people in the LET system agree between each other how many coins, let's call them credits, they want to give somebody for a service or a product that they're delivering to them. And people will say, well, it's roughly one local unit to a euro or something, but you allow, based on need and demand, people to decide what that rate would be. Also, maybe that you're delivering a service to somebody who has less resources, and you can offer it for less money, less local money. And so one of the things that comes up is, imagine if everybody starts at zero, right? Then people are going to end up in debt, because the very first exchange you make, if rather than offering something you purchase something, then you end up in debt. But debt isn't seen as a bad thing in a LET system, because it means that you are using resources from others, which is seen as a good thing. Now, most LET systems put in place a maximum level. If they think somebody is exploiting the system, then that'll send off an alert, and somebody will go and talk to them. And maybe the community agrees they're willing to support that person because they need it, and they support that person to go into debt, because don't forget, that person's debt is generating credit for others, right? So they can spend. So anyway, it's a great system. You can find out a lot more about it. We have one here in Culemborg. It's just not very active. And you also, of course, need the shopkeepers to start adapting it and things. Community cooperatives. So there's stakeholders from the community who can coordinate a number of different activities that are going on. We have this here. I would say I live in a kind of ecological neighborhood called Lanksmeer, with 300-400 households, and we have this kind of a setup here at that scale. The level at which you put in place these structures is something to discuss, but we do have a kind of group who then think about these different elements. So there are workshops and resources. What is it that people need? What are the skills they need to develop, to be able to meet their needs or express themselves or whatever it is? A land trust at the community that enables the community to make decisions about the land that they live on. So avoiding the speculation that I was talking about before. Enterprises that are grounded in the community, linked to cooperative businesses. For example, we have here a car share system that's owned cooperatively. An energy, Terabella. Terabella actually looks after the green areas in the community as a cooperative business. There is a local energy company. There is, very good secondhand place here, which, recycles stuff for the community. So, but at the moment they're still tied in to the money system from the main economy. And when that crunches and contracts, then it sucks energy out of this whole system. So that's why it's important to have your parallel currencies in place, because they can remain abundant when the mainstream economy contracts. And community supported agriculture. So we have a neighborhood farm here, for example, a city farm that they grow there. They grow a lot of the vegetables and fruit here. And you purchase you have a subscription, like you purchase a box of veg and things every week that are the seasonal ones that they grow. And so you don't know what you're going to get. It's a surprise, which is great. If you like surprises. And they have people with disabilities working on the farm as well and helping them out. So they organize events there, and people can come and have stands and stalls on Saturday. So it again, you're creating less dependence on the abstract system created by others. You have more ownership. You know where your food come from. You know the quality of it. You know the farmers, so you can go and talk to them if you have a suggestion or if you have a complaint, for example. And you can make a lot more decisions yourselves because these things are within your power, as it were. So this is a little kind of map in a way that I created for how we can develop these community economies that both allow us to be more independent of an economic system that has values and a design to it that doesn't meet our needs, both human or social or ecological, and enables people to contribute to it, even if they can't get a paid job, or that their work wouldn't be valued by the mainstream economy. As long as there's people who value it, then this system works. If you've got something to offer that people value, then you can contribute, you can get rewarded, the currency can circulate, as it were. So that's basically it. Just the summary was what I said at the beginning. Current structures are not working. Two ways we can engage with this: primarily at the policy level or at the community level. Ideally, they go hand in hand. But when it seems like it's going to be much harder to get traction at the policy level because it's so entwined globally, and that if one nation state starts to go rogue and do stuff differently, they're likely to be penalized by the global trading system. And because it's so intertwined, it's very hard to imagine how we're going to get coherent policy development at the economic level, nationally or internationally. So really, my kind of conclusion for myself is we have to focus on building these parallel economies at the community level. And I like this little Margaret Meg Wheatley once said to us when we had a session. She said, I heard from a nun this saying that is really great: proceed until apprehended. People say, well, can you do this? Well, you can just keep going until you bump up against somebody who says, no, you can't. And so that's what we have to do, I think, is to start to build these parallel systems and do it until and maybe nobody will, because we should be showing that we're really adding value, but until the system says no. One of the big problems, of course, is if you start doing stuff that operates outside the mainstream economy, then you've got questions around tax. You've got you're basically sucking money out of the measurement of progress for the country, being gross domestic product, and so the whole concept of progress becomes challenged as you build a parallel system. So how that would all play out is something we'd have to see, but we've got to start somewhere.